muinter kilmurry tá sibh go léir tá fáilte roimh go léir ile an seo in nacht chun an áir agus an mós thuirte CATHAL MacSWINEY. Chairman, Lord Mayor, you're all very welcome to Kilmurry. This is a very important weekend dedicated to the memory of the outstanding Irishman, Terence MacSWINEY. Terence MacSWINEY is not merely a Cork figure, not merely a Munster figure, not merely an Irish figure. He is a world figure, and we are here to do honour to his memory. He is the champion of all that is best in Irish life and Irish nationalism. He embraced the spirit of what the Germans call the Volkskeit of the Irish people. He embraced it wholeheartedly, determinedly, and he made things happen that sought to be brought about for centuries, but they weren't. As a consequence of his contribution to Irish nationalism and Irish republicanism, we have a free Ireland today. He was the person, singly in my view, most responsible for bringing the empire down, and that was some task. It was one of the great empires of the world, and the strength and power that the British Empire had was there for centuries uncracked, and it took the freedom fighters, and in particular Terence MacSwiney, Tomás McCurtain, and the compatriots of that time to correct the tyranny of centuries and what was unfortunately visited upon the Irish people for centuries. And Terence MacSwiney was Lord Mayor of Cork firstly in 2020. He was captured on August 12th, arrested, taken to Brixton prison, and the story of that goes on, and hopefully we'll address it somewhat later on this evening. But this is a very brief few words at this stage to welcome the Lord Mayor of Cork, Councillor Michael Finn. Lord Mayor, you're very welcome. I remember your dad before you. He was a champion of the people he represented. I think it was Cork South Central, if I'm not mistaken. He was a great champion of the people he represented, and I'm glad to see that you have inherited the baton and you have a distinguished antecedent and title. Dear people, I will not hold you at this point. I'll hopefully speak a few words later in the introduction of the great CATHAL Brugha and the Brugha family, Catherine as well, of course. But just for now, I would call upon the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor of Cork is one of the outstanding mayoralties across the world, and this was made famous because of Terence MacSwiney and his fellow compatriot who was assassinated in March of 1920. We can be so proud because these were the greats that literally brought the empire down and gave a headline to the world. We'll talk about it later, and CATHAL Brugha will lead us into the great story of both the MacSwiney and the Brugha family. And so accordingly, I call on the Lord Mayor to say a few words.
Gurmagat John agus is mór an áthas agus an frivléid orm a bheith an seo nocht in bhór measc don deire seachtainna cuioineáin CATHAL MacSwiney Éarard Vera Lake Corcaíoch Lake Éarnach a raibh clú agus cáil fud an domhan mar tródar a saoirse. It's indeed a great honour for me to be here and to be following in the footsteps of Terence MacSwiney as Ard Vera Corcaí. And it's not something that I take lightly, and I agree with you entirely that it was the men of 1920 in particular, Tomás McCurtain, Terence MacSwiney and Donal O'Callaghan, who followed, who have elevated this position to one of the best mayoralties in the world. And this chain of office that I wear, it's a privilege and an honour to wear it each day that I have the honour to do so. And I think, while he is celebrated here and indeed various sites, I have commenced moves in the city to ensure that there is a more fitting memorial located near his birthplace. And just this week we discovered that the city has purchased a death mask of Terence by Albert Power, that will go on display hopefully later in the year. I suppose upon my elevation as Ard Vera Corky, one of my first duties that I decided to do was to visit the grave in St. Finbar Cemetery and lay a wreath to Trelock MacSwiney and Tomás McCurtain, and I just felt that was a very important thing to do to ensure the continuation between the modern day and the days of the 1920s. And it was a very humbling experience for me to accept that position in Cork City Hall and to wear this chain, which is now 231 years old. And I think, it was the one, as I explained to people, I explained to school children as they visit the schools, it's the same chain that was worn by Terence MacSwiney, whose life and death created waves across the world, as John just mentioned. And I think that everybody who has followed in their footsteps since, has been very aware and very conscious of that history. In my acceptance speech, and I quoted Trelock MacSwiney in his Principles of Freedom when he wrote, "From a good thing rightly pursued can follow no bad consequence." And this is the motivation for me in office currently, as it should be for everybody involved in politics. He also encouraged us in that book to be restless for noble and beautiful things, as it is how we work today will decide how we live tomorrow. I think in many respects he was a man before his time. So on Thursday next, it'll mark 98 years since the light went out on the human life of Terence MacSwiney, but I think his spirit still endures and he continues to endear to countless generations. And I think it's very important for events like this weekend, for the exhibition space that I've just seen. You're doing fantastic work here as a historical and archaeological society to maintain that tradition and to keep that memory going. And I pay tribute to everybody who has been involved, not just this evening, but a couple of years ago when the President opened the museum. And I think it's very important for events like this to continue, and especially as we approach the 100th anniversary in 2 years' time. So it's been a great pleasure and an honour to follow in the footsteps of Terence MacSwiney, and I extend my thanks to the organisers, and as I said, it's a privilege to be in such company. So Gurmagwith.
Táimid Ballaha an seo chun an óra thuirt the Trelock MacSwiney. It's a great pleasure for me, born and reared in this parish, to be asked to conduct the ceremonies of the evening on behalf of this great world iconic leader, Terence MacSwiney. I've known the MacSwiney family and various members of the family, and of course the Brugha family, for decades. When I was in University College Cork, CATHAL was in UCD, and our paths crossed many times at various functions at that time. We were young, enthusiastic students advancing the cause of what we regarded as being the primary objectives of the student body politic at that time. Kind of rebel, kind of revolutionary, but all with the best ideas, the best purposes and the best targets. Terence MacSwiney is a unique figure in world history, as I say, and this encompasses all of the world, not merely where we inhabit on this island, but across the world. Due to him, the name of Irish freedom has been sanctified. He was, as I say, arrested on August 12th at Cork City Hall, wearing the mayoral chain of office when he was captured. He was taken to Victoria Barracks, he was court-martialed, and he was taken to Brixton, and on charges that were dubious, to say the best of it. And there are very interesting details in relation to the background of that capture. He lived at 4 Belgrave Place, that's on the north side of Cork City, and that evening a letter had been dropped in the letterbox of Mary and Annie MacSwiney, and that letter was that there was to be an assassination of a Sergeant Quinn in Tipperary. The reason that letter was dispatched to Terence MacSwiney's home was so that it would ground evidence on foot of which they were out to capture him and out to convict him, and that was the deviousness that was inflicted on the Irish people at large, but in particular on Terence MacSwiney, because he was the desired object of capture for the purpose of quelling the rebellious spirit of Cork. The fact of the matter is that we are, I think, about 6 days off his death. He died 74 days on October 25th, 1920. But his death was like a volcano across the world. It was admired on all continents. In India, the Indian National Congress stood in silence, passed a resolution of sympathy to Muriel MacSwiney and to the Irish people on the death of their great champion, Terence MacSwiney. The fact of the matter is that it was covered by world press, it was covered by the New York Times and by various broadsheet publications across Europe, especially in France. There is a beautiful picture of Lord Mayor Sweeney from a French magazine, which was taken 2 days before his death, when he was very emaciated. He was a man that had been well over 11 stone at one point, and at the end of the hunger strike, he was nearer 5 stone. So, and that emaciation took place in the face of persons and important sources, institutions, leading figures across the world who had sought the release of Terence MacSwiney. But alas, the British government, in its non-wisdom, saw fit to let him die after 74 days. But the fact is that MacSwiney elevated the name of Irish freedom to a new level beyond which it had not found. 1916 had been a dire disappointment. Terence MacSwiney had to come here to Kilmurry at that time, and he had to stand down the volunteers who were ready, willing and able to embark on a certain course as part of the rebellion of 1916. But alas, because of the Aud and what happened off the Kerry coast, that was not eventuated. And instead of that, matters had to be arrested and put aside for a little while more. That was a grave disappointment to Terence MacSwiney. My great friend CATHAL Brew will tell you all about this in detail later. But just to give an identification of the impact created by this individual. And it was a testament to what the strength and will and determination and bravery of a single individual can do. He was a leader in every sense. And all the volunteers in the Cork region, and he was commandant of the 1st Brigade of Cork. Liam Lynch was North Cork. He was meeting Liam Lynch on the night he was arrested, and Liam Lynch, as everybody knows, was equally well, not equal to Terence MacSwiney, but he was a wonderful Irishman who was shot in the Knockmill Downs, last in a tragic period of our history in 1923. But that's not for us to go into on this occasion. We are here to celebrate what is sanctified and holy. It is a cause of Irish freedom. Nothing more important. Freedom, on foot of freedom, every other liberty that the human condition and the human being has is grounded on freedom. Headlines were set out across India, Nehru, Gandhi. On the night, 3 nights after Terence MacSwiney died, the great Irish soprano, Margaret Burke-Sheridan from County Mayo, was due to go on stage in La Scala, and she could not do it. She said, "I'm heartbroken because a great Irishman and friend of mine has died in hunger strike today, 74 days after he commenced his hunger strike." And she was celebrated. In fact, she was identified as the Empress of Ireland because of her talents as a soprano. Toscanini, all the leading opera people of that time across Europe. As I say, she was due to sing in La Scala that night, but she was Covent Garden, she was in all the leading opera houses across Europe. But she could not sing that night because of the death of the wonderful Terence MacSwiney. Across the press of the world leading press, except there was, of course, a gutter press in England that endeavoured to besmirch the reputation and name of Irish leaders. But it got nowhere because the world was on our side. And the world was on our side, why? Because Terence MacSwiney set about and brought about the great networking that enabled the voice of the world, of the free world, to come to the rescue of Ireland. And that was the beginning of the breakup of the empire. The British Empire was one of the vastest empires in human history. And in my view, Terence MacSwiney was the champion and the leader who broke that tyranny of centuries. And he was followed across the world, and that's why he was so respected in the nations that followed. The Principles of Freedom that was published posthumously on the year after his death. He died in 1920, and that was published in 1921. I don't want to hold you up. I don't want to invade the time of my great friend and wonderful CATHAL Brugha, who comes from one of the... In republicanism, there is no royalty. If there was royalty, I can tell you that the families of MacSwiney and Brugha would be absolute royalty. We all owe a massive debt to the Brugha family and the MacSwiney family. They will live eternally in our hearts, and our hearts must have its heroes. But it's not merely in our hearts, but it's in our intellects as well. We need leaders and we need champions. And as I say, if royalty was a permitted category in republicanism, the MacSwiney and Brugha family are absolute royalty, undiluted, of the very best, and there's no court of appeal from that. They are quintessentially great, and it does me wonderful pleasure to introduce my great friend of many decades, CATHAL Brugha. And his lovely wife is here to support him. That's Catherine, but CATHAL will speak now.
An or mór seo dom, agus is an mór dom gur tháinig an ordmhéar Corcaí, a tháinig ó Blaclia an bheithansá, agus tháinig John Cumá ó Blaclia an bheithansá. Sinne cé gur as Blaclia sinne, tá mín ar an gcónaí a círí, so níor an toras go mór son. Ach tréis líon leis an cuiste a éach déanta go, seo tús deire seachtain, agus beag trí deire seachtain, féile let mé a tluisiant. Ja. Féile sibh tluisiant ag a deire? Gama? Gur hágad. Seo catan má chorlór, má chara, má fan céile, din si gachrod tom. Tréis líon liv, as an éach a déanta goibh, seo tasnú de trí bhliain, de Cumóra, trí deire seachtain, agus an sais planahán, a go ggéine mé sais cóhéachs an mar tús ar an Cumóra seo, mbliana agus an nachta bheith mé caint faoi na scríbhíní tréalach Maxine, agus bhí an sé lá scríomh agus tá siad a gom an só. Bhíonn sé cuaing ar a dachas agus mblianaíag ar polítíocht. So tá a gom bhfuil sé déanaach agus bhfuil beag go chuide go fór, so raim mé seach lóraach isteach sa nótaí a cá le amach don níthe. Agus éana mé Ryan Keshna. So, first of all, what was Terence MacSwiney? Lord Mayor? And it's something to, you want to think about yourself. Lord Mayor, Corkman, hunger striker, TD, competent, poet, dramatist, philosopher, mystic, son of a Kilmurry family, author of Principles of Freedom, or, as I would think, inspirer, somebody who inspired. And that would be my theme for tonight. He was one of many people who inspired the cause of freedom pre-1916. Then he was one of few people who inspired during the War of Independence. But in 1920, he was, as Dr. Donamani has talked about, he was a person who on his own actually inspired the world to do what? To actually break the shackles of an empire, a ruthless, malicious empire. And if anything, that's how he stands out. Where did he have an impact? And Dr. Donamani has talked about it, all over the world. India. Actually, his book, Principles of Freedom, was translated into many languages, including 3 languages, 3 Indian languages. China, we only found out recently, because I do a lot of stuff with China, that the equivalent of W.B. Yeats, a young poet called kilmurry, he was a young Chinese person, happened to be working abroad in Japan, and was picking up on a telegraph every day news of Terence MacSwiney's hunger strike and writing a poem about it. But it resonated with him because China was in parallel with us, in the sense that we never knew what was happening in China when we were having our famine, or as George Bernard Shaw, he called it the Great Starvation. And they were being flooded by the British East Tea Company, where they were being flooded with opium, with heroin. They had 50% of the trade in the world, and within a generation was reduced down to something like 4%. So they were being destroyed at the time that we were being destroyed. But they were trying to get rid of colonialism, and for kilmurry, Terence MacSwiney, what he was doing, it just resonated with him. He's doing something about colonialism. Vietnam. And of course, we get all our stories about people who are really good people, who are bad people. And a lot of people would say, Ho Chi Minh, he was a terrible bad man. He was a very good man from the point of view of Vietnam. He was working in London, working in a hotel, the way a lot of foreigners, washing dishes and thinking about this man on hunger strike. Who is he? What's he about? What's he doing? Terence MacSwiney inspired him. And he said, and he wrote at the time, a country with people like that's not going to be easily defeated. So, right throughout Gamsa in the former Soviet Union, and a lot of other countries, the same thing. I mean, in Catalonia, the mayor of Catalonia wanted to name a street after Terence MacSwiney. As it happened, and we have to accept there's a lot of politics, the same mayor was executed by Franco later. So it's still going on. So what is it about that? And what is it about principles of freedom? And what is the most often quoted passage from Principles of Freedom? This contest on our side is not one of rivalry and vengeance, but of endurance. It's not those who can inflict the most, but those who can suffer the most who will conquer. Though we do not abrogate our function to demand that murderers and evildoers be punished for their crimes. It is conceivable that the army of occupation could stop our functioning for a time. Then it becomes simply a question of endurance. Those whose faith is strong will endure to the end in triumph. The shining hope of our time is that the great majority of our people are now strong in that faith. He's saying this at his inauguration, after the assassination of Thomas McCarthy being inaugurated. And so Cork Corporation, and you've got people there who would be of a different persuasion. So he's saying, to you gentlemen of the minority here, I would address a word. You seem to be hypnotized by the evil thing, usurpation that calls itself government. I ask you again to take courage and hope. To me it seems, and I do not say this to hurt you, that you have a lively faith in the power of the devil, but little in the power of God. So what was Terence MacSwiney trying to do? He was trying to change the nature of a battle. So, Ireland versus Britain, Irish people versus British people, right versus might, right versus wrong. Change the nature of it, and then fight a battle. Next question. Who was Trailer MacSwiney? Who was Terence MacSwiney? Corkman, son of a Kilmurry family, a family that came from Donegal originally. Where does the name Sina come? Actually, a teacher who taught a long, long time ago in the North Mons said C is actually from the word wisdom or wise man. These were a wise family in Donegal. Now, there is a story about the change in the spelling, like double E or I, because the branch went to Scotland and the name changed. C became Si, and it changed. Basically, the MacSwineys were chieftains who worked for the O'Donnells. And when it came to trying to do something which ultimately ended up in the Battle of Kinsale, the McCarthys in Cork asked the O'Donnells in Donegal, would you send a tribe of soldiers down to Cork so as to help fight this battle? And so the relationship between the O'Donnells and the MacSwineys, the MacSwineys worked for the O'Donnells. It meant that they did a lot of things, including protecting them, which means that they were soldiers. But because they were so strong, they fostered the eldest son one to the other, so that they would ensure that there wouldn't, if there was a falling out, that it wouldn't go that far. Because if I have your eldest son, you have my eldest son, and so that's the sort of relationship that was there. That said, not to spend too much time on it, but when the flight of the Earls went and the O'Donnells went off to Spain and so on, the MacSwineys were not so pleased. And they're rumoured to have been up on the rocks, on the cliff, as the ships were going by, throwing rocks at them and saying, you're leaving us now. Why are you leaving us now? Don't do that. But anyway, that was the MacSwineys were asked to go and came here to Cork, to Kilmurry, and they were given the local castle, Clodagh Castle, which is a McCarthy castle. And so this is part of the inheritance of this whole area and why Kilmurry is so important. So the other side of MacSwiney, his mother, a Wilkinson from London, a woman that we know very little about except that she was a woman of amazing strong faith. There's a further story about that, but we can go over another time how come the father met her. But anyway, so his faith, still talking, imagine in a council meeting, and he's saying, anyone surveying, God is over us, and in his divine intervention we must have perfect trust. Anyone surveying the events in Ireland in the past years must see that it is approaching a miracle, how our country has been preserved during a prosecution unexampled in history, culminating in the murder of the head of our great city, Thomas McCartan. God has permitted this to try our spirits, to prove us worthy and noble, and to prepare us for a great and noble destiny. You among us who have no vision have been led astray by false prophets. I will give you a recent example. Only last week in our city, a judge acting for English usurpation in Ireland and speaking in the presumptuous manner of such people, ventured to lecture us and uttered this pagan sentiment. There is no beauty in liberty that comes to us dripping in innocent blood. At the stroke, this judge would shatter the foundations of Christianity by denying beauty to that spiritual liberty that comes to us dripping in the blood of Christ crucified. He, by his voluntary sacrifices on Calvary, delivered us from the domination of the devil when the pall of evil was closing down and darkening the world. Terence MacSwiney had a powerful belief in God, and he was inspired by the spiritual liberty brought to us, given to us by Jesus Christ. And another comment, but if the rulers of the earth fail us, we still have refuge in the ruler of heaven. And though to some the judgments of God seem slow, they never fail, and when they fall, they are overcome. Which way did Terence MacSwiney work, live, go about his life? By thoughtful reflection on the lives of the young people around him. And he was working as an accountancy clerk or an accountant in Cork and Dwyer's. Corrupt commerce was what bothered him. His thoughts became the Bible for freedom movements throughout the world. He was a philosopher who developed our understanding of the importance of freedom to the individual. His book ended up being read throughout the world. But the particular quote that people often quote, and I would have heard it quoted so often, in Principles of Freedom. A spiritual necessity makes the true significance of our claim to freedom. The material aspect is only a secondary consideration. A man facing life is gifted with certain powers of soul and body. It's of vital importance to himself and the community that he be given a full opportunity to develop his powers and to fill his place worthily. When one country holds another in subjection, that other suffers materially and morally. It suffers materially being a prey for plunder. It suffers morally because of the corrupt influences the bigger nation sets at work to maintain its ascendancy. Why was Terence MacSwiney inspired to do what he did? To become the person that he was? To become a leader in the war against the British Empire? And as a person, he was nothing like Thomas MacCurtain. Thomas MacCurtain was a natural politician. Terence MacSwiney was a poet, a quiet man who worked in the background. Again, in Principles of Freedom, we fight for freedom, not for the vanity of the world, not to have a fine conceit of ourselves. The inspiration is drawn from a deeper element of our being. We stifle for self-development individually and as a nation. If we don't go forward, we must go down. It's a matter of life and death. It's our soul's salvation. A majority has no right to annul it, no power to destroy it. Tyrannies may persecute, slay, or banish those who defend it. The thing itself is indestructible. Next question, when? When did Terence MacSwiney inspire the people of Cork to become militant? World War I started in July 28, 1914. Terence MacSwiney borrowed to set up a journal which he published for the first time in September the 19th, a journal for militant Ireland. And in it he wrote, "We have come to let them know that Ireland is not to be delivered over to serve as a prop for a decadent and tottering empire." It was an anti-First World War launch. That was the timing, that was when. And of course we still get the rhetoric from lots of others about what it was and the confusion of the First World War and the Second World War. The First World War was an evil imperialist war and has been now clearly described, although it was written at the time quite early on by Roger Casement, which is now published and available under the name of one of his writings, The War Against Europe. So the plan was to subjugate Ireland for another generation. 50,000 volunteers died, Irish volunteers died in the First World War. The intention was that there would be 50,000 conscripts, and then we would be down again, only recovering in time to be used in the front lines of World War II. That was the plan. And so the other question about when, because there was controversy, not a good time. 1916 is not a good time. So Terence MacSwiney campaigned on all fronts, particularly in his writing. Yeah. Come on. 1916 on theological grounds. The same grounds that had been explained and covered by Terence MacSwiney back in 1914 and then in 1920 when he republished this. So The issue on which they condemn 1916 is that one of the conditions of a just war is to have the moral certainty of success. And he answered this in his leaflet, and I'll quote from this, from Appendix 2, and this can be got on the internet. Philosophers who lay down the moral certainty of success as one of the conditions to justify revolt have not defined success. Obviously, a clear moral success fulfills the condition. While a Pyrrhic victory may be a real defeat, a seeming defeat may be a real victory. The rebellion of 1916 is a case in point. Ireland's claim, which was being treated with contempt by England, became an international question. The very English publicists who had treated it with insolent indifference declared unanimously that its settlement was a matter of urgent imperial necessity. The rebellion was a success. Whither was Terence MacSWINey bringing us? Inspiring us to go. And still now is inspiring us to go. And of course, the unfortunate thing about our whole time from 1916 onwards is that if you were to think of it in terms of governance, 1916 they executed the leaders. It's like the first team is taken out. So now you've got the subs. And on, again after again, the better people were taken out. If they were here, how would they be inspiring us? Terence MacSWINey, I believe, would be inspiring us to live in a multilingual, bilingual world of international politics, us playing a role in business, politics and economics internationally through the English language, but at home. The development of the values and the education and the children would be Osgoilan. So, a inin, Vishi Gavlian nor Forshe Boss, Mavohar, the Hogi Leguilan. So, Keger Asan Kahar the Kashe Alan It done a mock goody bela on Gerg, gonna ne Archnet and son, confiasa Kurar Kugelna. The Kashe Alan is Brizoon. Kadalurikshe, Laur Galen, Diaga Kusula Sharklanum Christ, August Tashi going Swalia, August Noti Noti Ipian Louis, Kadas Breelish and Fokkelshaw, as a Fokkelshoot, a Gonavisha Kurfiaus, Aaron Galen. Been and rather be a guest, go make on Galen, Martanga Laura, a Gwing Mardini, Swalia, Akmemi Dahanga, August I saw barely Satira Harla. So, Countess Laura. A scríshe ná scéil seanúna. Inis seo an cóp agus is tá an tála an ghuiil na leabhar seo a going. Scéil seanún bin an lasana a bhéir taig ó Moracú imil na Catharach agus scríshe it dul a rather a machari imil Catharach con an ascéil a laga sias. So, mar am réhrá dearn sé, chuirsias ganóna finini a gurkig ó hosach bliana a seaca chuige deire bliana a seaca seacht an méid seo stig. So, dá mar é gur sé ann bheadh sé spreagad doing chun an Ghaeilge. Two big questions that dominated his life. One, whether the people of Cork would respond to his attempts to inspire them. Most of his writing, actually, was about trying to inspire people to be ready and willing to rise. We have all his writings except one that I haven't seen. his writing on Diarmuid O'Donovan Rossa, who was his hero. So he wrote a lot of poetry, and some are published. One published, which is very nice to have, Despite Fools' Laughter. And I have it here, and you can see Doruri le Gro Mora, to my dad from my mum, and she has written Sculita Nullag 1944. Just to read one of his poems, Moira, which he wrote when in Belfast jail about my mother when she was brought on a visit to Belfast jail to see him. Because even though he was Lord Mayor, he was more time in jail as Lord Mayor than he was actually free. Baby, baby, sweet and wise, deeper than the morning skies, is the wonder of your eyes. While we pause before this wonder, all life's cares must drop asunder in the spell you hold us under. We have been sad reviewing barren years and fruitless ruing. Lo, you give our lives renewing. Night had flashed to us a warning. We prayed, and God not scoring, in your eyes restore the morning. It's a coincidence for us, for Catherine and me, that we're fortunate that we have 2 grandchildren born to us just very recently. So it means a lot when I'm talking about my grandfather to be talking about, to be thinking about our grandchildren. The question driving him was whether he could motivate or inspire the people of Cork to rise, which we know they did better than any other county. So one of his poems, the lead poem in Despite Fools' Laughter, by that name. I cling to it, I live in it, my dream, and make it to appear all I desire. Until there flashes hope, this fitful gleam may glaze into a grander, steadier fire. And I may raise aloft a holy pyre, whereon all dark misgivings to consume, passing from one grand height to on still higher, reaching the height that did afar illume, to gather glowing flowers I knew did somewhere bloom. Yes, I must build it still, despite fools' laughter. I could not stay my hand, I would not try, though all the dark of night shut down hereafter. Should I now quench the star I follow by? O God, the hope that lifts me to the sky and keeps the dreaded darkness long at bay, where should I wander now if it did die? And oh, what fool, while still it shoots one ray, would banish all the light and darken all the way. He wrote long poems. He worked in a Dwyer's, and then at night went home doing his studies, and at the weekends he would go to plays, go to opera, loved that. We had the privilege for funny political reasons, my mother was never allowed to see her father's diaries, and then we discovered that they were in the National Library. And Catherine here arranged to have them brought to UCD. And for one day every week, Catherine would read for an hour from the diaries to my mother. My mother grew up in Germany. Her mother had difficulties. I mean, not surprisingly, but she had a lot of difficulties. And so my mother knew nothing about her father. And this is one of the things that is somewhat strange, that my parents didn't talk about the past, always talking about the future and things had to be done and so on. But my mother didn't know her father and got to know her father from this weekly hour where Catherine read. And he's writing in his diaries about what he's doing and so on, and what play he went to and show he went to, and he's trying to do his studies, and he's at night, he's doing a BA at night, and then he's writing this wonderful poetry, and it's, and we have so much of it. And my mother is getting worried. What's he doing about his studies? And then the next week, he's still writing this stuff. And here's another one, Battle Cries, and he's published it, and it's Our Vow and Sunlight on Our Steel, an Ode to a Bullet. I mean, not very peace-loving. The March of the Cork Brigade. And another one, even longer, Hardback, The Music of Freedom, using a pen name, Corridor. And it's one real long poem, trying to inspire the people of Cork. And what's my mother thinking? He's going to fail his exams. And then he does. And the thing I really love, my mother turning to Catherine and says, I told you he was going to fail his exams. So, this is what he was trying to do. He then, I remember hearing a conversation I think he had with Daniel Corkery, and they're walking out into the hills, as they often did, and he said to you, I envy you. We're both writers, but you will be into the future, but I may not be there. He was aware of the imminence of what he was about. He graduated from writing poetry to writing plays. And I think if he was to self-describe himself on a CV, I think he would say dramatist, playwright, rather than poet, even though he published more poetry. And interestingly, he was not part of the Dublin Yeats movement. He was part of a Cork movement, and there were several groups that they started off in Cork, and if anything they were international, and they were more associated with Ibsen rather than the... And it's not that the Yeatsian movement was very Anglo, it was Irish in a different way, but certainly they were following a different star in Cork in their plays. And in the museum, there's a photograph of the three of them as three young men, and I think it is the three founders of one of their societies, Terence MacSWINEY in the back, and I think it's Daniel Corkery in the front. I'm not sure who the other one is. So his major play, which was actually put on in the Abbey after he died, compliments of W.B. Yeats, and was packed out. And I believe, because you hear this information from this here and there, that my mother may have acted in The Revolutionist sometime in the 40s. She never told us anything like that. Anyway, The Revolutionist, a play in 5 acts. And so the whole idea was to inspire people, to motivate people, and it is about an individual, which I think was based to an extent on Parnell, who was going around campaigning, fighting for a party so as to get people to support a revolutionary change politically. And in the end, he gets a cold, gets flu, he gets seriously ill and dies, and it's all part of the play. So the central character gives his life. And in a way, for a lot of people, in retrospect, because of the hunger strike, they saw this as a prefiguring what he was going to do. And maybe so, but I think he was developing the ideas as he wanted. So what was he trying to inspire the people of Cork to do? Which they did. The men of Cork to stand up with the women of Cork by their sides, and the children. I mean, the stories are amazing, and please God, over the next few years there will be proper acknowledgement and celebration of what was done from City Hall to Kilmurry. and all the battle sites and all the great things that were done by the great people. And let's get away from the idea of one individual or two individuals. It was the people. So inspiring people to stand up, but being very careful. And there's a little anecdote in the book on Thomas Kent, which shows that he wasn't out to seek battles with British soldiers, because the British Empire was very happy to send troops of more and more soldiers off. They were expendable. If they were expendable in the First World War, they were expendable here. But any battle that you would have, you would lose some people. And in the unfortunate, sad event with the Kents, where they were being attacked and they stand up for themselves, and it ends up with Thomas Kent being executed, being one with the 1916 leaders, and another brother being killed and another one badly wounded. Then the next night, and it's just an anecdote to understand Terence MacSwiney, the next night the British are coming for the Hales family, and it turns out that MacSwiney and McCurtain are in the same house. And one of the Hales is about to take up the gun and he's going to have a go. And Terence MacSwiney pushes his hand down and says, "Remember the Kents." So what was it? He said, "We can't afford to lose families like you. We've just lost the Kents. We can't afford to lose the Hales." So he was seeing ahead. So the whole point was not to get into fights with British soldiers. It was to prove that we could not be defeated, to prove that England should not win. We were in a battle with British imperialism. So Britain's approach, divide and rule, bully and bribe. Terence MacSwiney's approach, undermine the basis of empire. Actually take the wind out of the sails of empire. Britain was overstretched. And this is the point that Roger Casement brings out so clearly. The reason for World War I was that Germany was catching up, and Britain had control over the oceans, but within a couple of years they would lose it. They'd be sharing it with Germany and so on. The war against Europe, if they lost that, they would lose control over the empire. They were not looking for more, they were looking to hold on to what they had. So they were overstretched. They actually had a weakness. And they were relying on people throughout the world acquiescing to their rule. And if you could demonstrate that we did not acquiesce, then you undermined it. So the question, the second whether question is whether he could trap Britain in an impossible situation which could lead to the undermining of the empire. Could he trap them into a battle which he could win and they could lose? And his opportunity came with the legalized murderous, cruel assassination of his predecessor, Thomas MacCurtain. In some ways more heinous than the executions of 1916, because who were these people? But Thomas MacCurtain was a member of the Dáil, and he was Lord Mayor of Ireland's second city. And it was proven in the court case afterwards, officially sanctioned all the way up, they assassinated him. So they are in danger because they're actually falling down from the moral high ground. So Terence MacSwiney took the high ground in his speech becoming Lord Mayor, the speech that I quoted from early on, full of confrontation and challenging them. And also in his second great speech, the court case, and then in his hunger strike. Now, The point about the hunger strikes is that people say, oh gosh, that's a terrible thing, and why would he do that, and where would he imagine that? And then people say, well, in India they did have hunger strikes, and some of them followed Terence MacSwiney. And then if you go back in history, you found that in both India and Ireland, and the Irish language traces back to India, to Sanskrit, so there are commonalities. So there's a common history going back, that if you're utterly powerless and you want to take a case against a senior person, you do it by hunger strike. And so actually what people miss is that hunger strikes have been used quite a lot. And hunger strikes, and it's only just come out, hunger strikes were used quite a lot some years previously. I mean, when we won the 1918 election, actually it was with women's votes as well as men's. The women had the suffrage. Not all women, because it's things to do with poverty and they had to be over 35 and all that sort of thing. But the women in England, the most amazing women, the suffragettes, used hunger strike. And in one case, one of them, she was force-fed 100 times, caused immense damage. So it was something that had been used, and the British were used to it, and they had an act specifically for dealing with hunger strikes called the Cat and Mouse Act, which is, okay, let them out after a little while, and then they'll be a bit weak and they'll go away and it won't be much trouble to you. So the opportunity was there. What Britain should have done is they should have actually let him go. But because he was so in their faces, and he was the Lord Mayor, and he was a member of the Dáil, he was so put up to them, you have to let me go. To the point where they felt they couldn't let him go. Now, in other words, they took the bait. And the whole idea then is that if they let him go, he wins. And he would say, you let me go, because in letting me go, you are proving that you are wrong and I am right. You are giving in, and we have a victory against you. You lose moral authority. No longer do you ever have the high ground again. And everybody knows all over the world, and it will be copied all over the world. So that was the whole idea. We then, the Irish people, all over the world, wherever we were, we campaigned. And so you would hear stories of the longshoremen in New York, which is the dockers, refusing to unload British ships. And so this is presented as something spontaneous. Actually, it wasn't. We organised it. The Irish Americans organised that to ensure that that would happen. So everywhere we hyped it up, and that was the whole idea, to create this problem, to create the pressure. So the whole idea was they were caught if he didn't give up. If they let him stay on hunger strike till he dies, then it is proven that they are not the mother of all nations and Mother England and so wonderful and benign and all that sort of thing, that they were just a cruel despotic empire, and they would never recover. And that was the whole idea. So they took the bait, and we started the campaign, and it got worse and worse, to the point where in Britain the King wrote to the Prime Minister twice and said, why don't you let this man go? He's a good man, you know. And the Prime Minister wrote back and said, if we do, the government will fall. And furthermore, my Lord King, you will not get a government from the opposition either. Because if we let him go, we lose authority in Ireland and beyond. We cannot do that. So this was the point. So this was an aggressive act. And by the way, Gandhi in India wrote about Terence MacSwiney, and we have in his writings, because his writings are there and can be got on the internet, a speech that he gave to a boys' school. And It's kind of funny, really, because we were at a celebration of 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth just a few weeks ago, and they wanted to celebrate MacSwiney alongside with this Gandhi, and it's on the day of the World Day of Non-Violence from Gandhi. But what did Gandhi say about MacSwiney? He said to the boys, you should have the spirit of MacSwiney. And then he said, well, I just think he's a little bit too aggressive for me. So he hadn't gone that far. So it's just interesting to see that he hadn't accepted the degree of aggression that MacSwiney was using. So the whole point was to bring the case before the world and, in essence, to take the wind out of the sails of the righteousness of the British Empire. And this is what he did. Basically what they were saying, they're saying that they should govern Ireland, they should govern the Empire, and the British government should, and we're saying no, we shouldn't. And they're saying you cannot govern yourselves. And the whole thing about what Britain was doing in Ireland, trying to create dissension, Orange versus Green, Free State versus Republic, create civil wars. In India, what were they doing? They were the ones who were enforcing the caste system, to have the castes all against each other, divide and rule. You're not governable, you can't govern. And whereas Terence MacSwiney was putting himself in the front line and saying that you can't govern me, and taking the moral high ground. They were caught. To win, he had to come off hunger strike. To let him die would prove he was right, that the empire was cruel and despotic, not the mother of all nations, but the monster enslaving many peoples. So when he did die, the Irish around the world campaigned against the empire and developed allies in every country, political campaigns against the empire. And we actually have seen the newspaper cuttings of the time, which were all gathered, and it is extraordinary, and we have a copy of them. It's extraordinary the number of countries. So the British were actually gathering these to see the temperature. So, extraordinary times, an extraordinary person. Just to conclude, what was the most extraordinary aspect about all of this? That the British Empire was so bad that you would need to do this? Actually, Ireland had lost half its population within living memory. The famine. Quarter died, quarter emigrated, we lost half, and the other half were not doing well. What George Bernard Shaw called the Great Starvation. That was an extraordinary time that needed extraordinary response. Another one, was it that the British government was so vulnerable? They were. They were going to fall, but they're still at it. It's trying to, it's the whole Brexit problem is people hankering back for that. Maybe the most extraordinary aspect of all of this is it that Terence MacSwiney believed in the legacy of the Son of God, that his Holy Spirit was available to live in our spirit and can give us the strength to fight against evil. So, which is most extraordinary? I believe that that is the one, and I believe that is the lesson for our time. That strength is available to us, and that he availed of it in a very modern way, and that inspired him. And I would hope that this could inspire our young people. I see this this commemoration period, a bit like we finished the first half of a game of hurling, football, depending which side you're on, and we're about to start the second half. And I hope that we can use this opportunity to actually inspire our children, our grandchildren, and onwards for the years ahead. Gabriel.
Tá sé sin go sarbhá agus gur míle mágad a cathal. On the night MacSwiney died, it was October 25, 1920. On that night it was said, Ireland has lost a beautiful soul. And that is so true. MacSwiney was guided and lived by and with a rosary beads and a crucifix. And how much more permanent, how much more spiritual can a life with meaning have than to be guided and to live with a rosary beads and a crucifix? There was Father Dominic by his side in his last fateful days as he departed this world. But he was a beautiful soul, and unfortunately, so frequently we see soulless countries. But he was the host and wine of beauty in the nation of that time. And it is God's wish, I think, that the spirit which emanated from MacSwiney will live forever in the hearts of Irish people everywhere throughout the world. There is one beautiful piece from a poet, one of the 1916 leaders, and that was Joseph Mary Plunkett. And Plunkett, apart from saying, I see his blood upon the rose and in the stars the beauty of his eyes, his body gleams amid eternal snow, his tears fall from the sky. All pathways by his feet are worn, his strong heart stirs the ever-beating sea. His crown of thorns is twined with every thorn, his cross is every tree. One little couplet from a subsequent poem by Joseph Mary Plunkett, who was an associate of Terence MacSwiney, was that many live that one may die, and one must die that many live. And the association and the parallel with Jesus Christ and the life of Terence MacSwiney is so compelling that it must fill our hearts with joy that this was a national leader who we all salute. God bless you all.
Can I thank you all for coming this evening? Can I thank particularly our esteemed friend and the grandson of Terence MacSwiney and Dr. John O'Mahony. And can I just invite you all back? There is a reception in the museum. We'd be delighted to have you. And it's been a very inspiring evening so far, and I hope it will continue. Okay?